All right, guys, story time. So, here's how it goes. There's this guy, and he's a good guy, and the guy's got like a year to live. And so, there's this other guy this guy is just great, okay? And he wants to bless this guy, And he says, man, this guy's got such a short time here on earth. Let's, and I want to make a difference. Let's gift this guy. Let's gift him 1,000 gold bars. So this guy gives this other guy 1,000 gold bars. Let's just call him Joe. Okay. So Joe gets 1,000 gold bars. And he's so happy. He's got a year to live. He's like, what can I do with these 1,000 gold bars? And he thinks to the guy that gave him the 1,000 gold bars. He says, man, that guy was great, and I gotta say thanks to this guy somehow. How do I say thanks? He says, I got it. I'll put these 1,000 gold bars in my front lawn for everybody to see what a great guy this guy is. And he's like, as long as everybody can see these 1,000 gold bars, they'll know how rich this guy is, and they'll know how much this guy has richly blessed me, and they can see how rich I am now because of this guy. And what better way to say thank you to this guy but putting these 1,000 gold bars on display? Well, then there's this thief. He don't like the guy who gave the bars. He don't like Joe. He don't like either of these guys. So this thief says, get me them 1,000 bars. I'm going to get me those bars. How am I going to do that? So he concocts an idea, and he says, well, the man gave him the 1,000 bars. He's by everybody's standards, a great guy, but I hate this guy, him and all his gold bars. Get them gold bars. So he goes to Joe, and he says, Joe, what a wonderful idea you've had to put these 1,000 gold bars on display. I commend you for that, and what a great way to say thanks to the guy who gave them to you. And Joe says, yeah, that was a pretty nice idea, wasn't it? And the thief says to him, he says, Joe, maybe what you should do is make sure more people can see them. Put some cameras on it. Let everybody see these gold bars that were given to you. Yeah. And Joe's like, well, I was thinking about giving some of this away over here. And he's like, but if you give it all away, how are you going to show them? How are you going to show them what your buddy gave you? Joe thinks, he's like, you're right, man. And he's like, no, the best way you can say thank you to him and show what a great guy he was by you gotta preserve these bars at any cost. And Joe thinks about it, and he's like, yeah, I guess you're right. Well, let's hold on to these bars. But it's wearing on his conscience, and he wants to do something with them. Now the thief let this sit for a minute, and he says, all right, stage 2. And he calls up a couple of his buddies. And he says, listen, guys, he's got these 1,000 bars out there, and these bars are going to be ours. Okay? So I just need you to trust me on this plan. Here's what you're going to do. I need you to run over there and start messing with his bars. So your buddies run down there, and his buddies run down there, and they start messing with the bars, and Joe's not thinking much about it. He's like, well, as long as they don't do anything with them. And so Joe goes out there and he says, all right, you guys, just don't mess up the stack. It looks real nice. Just don't mess up the stack. Trying to get your fingerprints all over them, and just don't take nothing. Just don't take nothing. I don't really care what you do outside of that. And so, the guys go over there and they mess around for a little bit, and then they leave. And Joe's like, well, I gave them a strong word, and then they seem to listen to that. And the thief's like, so he says, calls his buddies back, and he says, all right, guys, next stage, I need one of you guys to go over there and try to steal these bars. But I'm going to stop you, okay? You got to put up a little fight, and I'm going to give you some strong words. I'm going to put my hands on you. And you guys got to run away scared, okay? You got to run away scared, okay? Just remember that. Just leave. Don't mess around too much. Just, put up a little fight and leave. So they're like, all right, I gotcha. And so Joe's sitting there and he's minding his own business, and these guys come over and they start fiddling with him, and Joe recognizes these guys. And he says, hey guys, I see you're coming to mess with my bars. You know the rules, you can mess with them, just don't mess up the pile. Got to keep it looking nice. Try not to get in the way of the camera, okay? And just don't take none of my bars. And so they're like, yeah, sure, Joe. Sure, we're your buddies. And then they start pocketing them. Now Joe's like watching these guys stealing it, but he's uncomfortable in approaching this. He's not a big one for conflict. And so Joe says, hey, you guys, get out of here. And then he says, Earl. And so the thief comes running out, whose name is Earl. And Earl says, get out of here. You know who I am. Get out of here. Get out of here. And he roughs him up a little bit, and the guys go running off. Now, Joe is so grateful. He's never felt so safe in his life. He's never felt so safe in his life. He's like, I was real worried about these bars being stolen, and old Earl's over here like, dude, you're doing the right thing. I'm glad you listened to me. I'm glad you put it on display. Look, these guys you got it on display. These guys are going to come out. People are bad. Don't worry about those guys. They're just haters, man. They just want your stuff, and don't worry. As long as I'm here, I've delivered you from these guys. And Earl just put on the grease, and Joe feels good. Joe feels good. He knew he had some problems in the neighborhood, but Joe still has another neighbor. And that other neighbor says, Joe, what are you doing, man? Joe's like, what? Dude, you got to do something with those bars. You got all these bars. Why don't you do something with them? Well, I got to put them on display so everybody can see how rich I am. Well, why do you want people to see how rich you are? Well, because I wanted to say thanks to this guy that made me rich, and he's a rich guy too, and I just want everybody to see how rich he is, and so I thought the best way to show how rich he was by showing people how rich he made me. And so I put these bars out here for everybody to see. And he's like, you didn't even put up a fence. And he's like, oh, don't worry. Earl's coming over to put me up a nice hedge of protection. And he says, and his neighbor says, Joe, says, you want people to know you're rich, man, and how rich he made you. So why don't you do something with the money? Something that everybody could see. And Joe's like, I don't understand. He says, think about this. Think about the guy who owns Martwall, right? He's like, what about him? Well, do you know who he is? Well, no. And And Joe's thinking about this, and he says, how rich do you think the guy who owns Martwall is? And Joe's like, oh, he's got to be rich. He's got to be rich. And he says, how much do you think's in his bank? Oh, I wouldn't have a clue. Who owns the bank? I don't know. And he says, so what do you know about this guy? Well, he's got a bunch of stores. He's got stores everywhere, and he's got employees, and he's across the world. And he says, well, right, you know him because of what he's done with the money, but not because of how much money he has. You don't know how much money he has. You know how much he's put out into the world. You know what his money's done for him, and that's how you know how much money he has. Joe thinks about it, and he says, I'll think about that. Then he leaves, and here comes Earl. And Earl says, don't listen to that guy. Are you crazy? That's how you lose your money. You can't just go giving it out to people, and they're just out to take your money. And Joe's scared again. He's like, think about it, man. If those guys came to rob you, who else might come to rob you? Joe thinks about that, and he's like, oh, I got it. And so now he's got a conflict in his head, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And so he calls his other neighbor back up, and he says, neighbor, I'm close. And the neighbor says, listen, buddy, if you've already spent every gold bar, do they have any gold bars left to steal? And he says, no. And he says, okay, are you still rich? And he says, well, yes. And they said, do you think people will know? He says, maybe. But then Earl comes back into the conversation. He says, he's just trying to take your money. He's probably got a scam of his own. And Earl's got the fear put in Joe. And Joe says, that's scary, man. So he leaves everybody alone. And then Earl dies. But here's the part, or then Joe dies. But here's the part you didn't know. Nobody was left to protect the bars but good old trusted Earl. Old Joe died and kept them bars till the day he died. And his neighbor warned him. But old Earl wanted those bars. And he got those bars. He didn't get them right away, but he got them in the end. Next conversation, Deliverance Ministry. Bye, guys.